Hi, welcome back to the channel. This video is a roundup of the latest news and events in the world of business and finance. I've picked out what I think are the most interesting and salient stories over the last 24 hours or so. And in this video, we'll talk about the largest ever computer gaming deal that has just been announced, a $30 billion merger between two of the big players in the market. I'll provide the latest update from Turkey, where we've had an insight into how corporate governance is operating in the country. We'll talk about the relationship between China and Ecuador. And China has been one of the big backers for Ecuador over the last 10 years. And Ecuador is now in a serious amount of debt to China. So we'll go through some details on that. I'll bring you an update on the gas market. Prices have jumped up again over the last couple of days. And there have been some interesting developments with regards to the Russian gas pipeline. I'll bring you the latest news from Tesla and Rivian, some interesting developments on both of those companies. And finally, there's a new richest man in Asia, and I'll give you an update on who that is and how he's making his money, and also why he's intending to give away 99% of his wealth. So before we get into all of that, I'd just like to remind you that I've included chapters in this video to make it easy for you to be able to skip through sections if there's something that you're not particularly interested in. So the financial markets had another bad day yesterday with falls across most of the indices. And the reason for this is that the markets are still digesting the news that we're going to see more interest rate rises this year, and that quantitative easing that's been used all across the world is now starting to be cancelled. In addition to that, we've got the continued rise in the number of cases of Omicron, which is affecting a lot of different industries, particularly the airlines and hospitality and leisure sectors. So yesterday, the Dow Jones and the FTSE 100 both fell around about 0.5%. The Nasdaq and the S&P ended up broadly flat. And we saw falls of over 1% in the FTSE 250, the DAX in Germany, Paris and the Nikkei. The crypto markets also continue to be affected, and for a brief time yesterday, Bitcoin dipped below $40,000, which is seen as being a critical level for the turning point in the crypto markets. It's actually bounced back and is now trading at around about $42,000, so it was a brief moment. Ethereum also dipped below its benchmark price of $3,000 briefly, but has now returned to a level of around about $3,100. So we can see the ongoing concerns in all of the markets. There's a lot of nervousness out there right now, and the markets are quite fragile. Any negative news is causing the markets to go into the red immediately. If you're a gamer, you'll be very familiar with Take-Two. This is the company that owns Rockstar Games. Some of its games include Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption, and Take-Two is predominantly a console game manufacturer. So these are the blockbuster games that are released on PlayStation and Xbox and go global on release. So these things are similar to movies in the way that they're promoted, and they are big budget and big news and big profit. Now, Take-Two have been increasingly concerned over the last couple of years that they don't have any sort of foothold in the mobile gaming market. And mobile gaming is the fastest growing section of the market because people are playing on handheld devices, and these games have a completely different monetization to the console games because they source a lot of their revenue from advertising and in-game purchasing. So Take-Two have launched a $12.7 billion takeover of Zynga. And Zynga is a mobile game producer whose most famous games are Farmville, Merge Dragons, and a number of puzzle games. The deal has been structured with a $3.50 payment in cash and $6.36 in Take-Two shares. And the headline price represents a 64% premium against Zynga's closing share price the day before the deal was announced. Now, it's an interesting acquisition because Zynga hasn't really been making a huge amount of profit and doesn't really have any blockbuster games in the same way that Take-Two does. It has lots of users on a daily basis, but it doesn't dominate the market. It doesn't have the number one product. But Take-Two believe that there's somewhere in the region of $100 million of cost savings that they will be able to enjoy when they bring the two businesses together. It will be interesting to see whether this deal actually does complete, because Zynga now has a go shop period of 45 days. So they can go out into the market and see whether there are any other parties who are interested in buying them for a higher price. So it's possible that we could see a bidding war if somebody else decides to enter the market. I've seen some interesting news coming out from Turkey over the last couple of days regarding corporate governance. So the biggest mobile phone operator in Turkey is called Turkcell, and that company is a private enterprise whose shares are listed. And one of the biggest shareholders is a fund manager called Letter One, and they hold around about 20% of the stock. And Letter One is the investment vehicle of a Russian billionaire called Mikhail Fridman. Now, Turkcell has been struggling alongside the rest of the Turkish economy for the last few years, and in October 2020, the Turkish Wealth Fund, which is a state-owned entity, took a 26% stake in the company. Now, as part of that deal, the Turkish Wealth Fund was entitled to appoint 5 directors to the board out of a board of 9 people. So that gave them the majority control in the company. And of the 5 directors it appointed, 4 of them were workers from the AK party, so President Erdogan's party, and the other is an employee of the Turkish Wealth Fund itself. So none of these directors have any experience in the telecoms market, and we don't know what their background is in terms of industry experience generally. Now, Mikhail Fridman is unhappy with the performance of Turkcell, and he's now made a public statement asking for these directors to be removed from the board and for the Turkish Wealth Fund's influence to be reduced regarding Turkcell. So what we're seeing here is direct criticism of the way this company is being operated, and essentially it's being accused of being a state-run entity because the majority of the board are from the Turkish government and they're making decisions that are not commercial. So Fridman's very unhappy with the way this is being operated, and it will be interested to see what the response is to this and whether there's any action taken or whether this is just completely ignored going forward. So I'll keep you posted as soon as there's any news on that front. Gas prices have once again gone up by 6% over the last 24 hours. And this is predominantly driven by the European markets and the supply of gas from Russia. So it's been in the press a lot recently, and I posted a video relating to Russia's latest pipeline infrastructure. They've built a second pipeline to Germany called Nord Stream 2. And there's a lot of controversy over that pipeline because it's seen as being an area where Russia could start to influence the politics of Europe because everybody's becoming more dependent on Russian gas. And if they decide to start withholding the supply of that gas, then that could push prices up and it could apply pressure onto certain countries to vote in favour of Russia with regards to geopolitical issues. The US has become involved in this and they are very negative with regards to the opening of Nord Stream 2, which is now built and completed, but not operational. And Russia have been accused of withholding gas supplies to push the prices up to increase their influence. Now, Russia has a number of pipelines, and one of the biggest is called Yamal, which is an onshore pipeline that runs through Belarus, Poland, and terminates in Germany. Now, the gas in these pipelines flows due to the constant use of the pipeline. So as you open up one end of the pipe, gas starts to flow, and therefore it draws through more and more gas. Now, for the last 17 days, gas has actually been flowing in the wrong direction. It has been going back towards Russia. And the reason for that is that a lot of the users of this gas have been using their reserves rather than drawing on new gas supplies from Russia because of the increased prices. So everybody is now running down their stock levels because they don't want to be incurring more cost at the latest prices. So it's reported that gas has actually been flowing back to Russia since the 21st of December on this pipeline. And the impact that this is having is that it's driving up prices. Now, nobody really knows what's going on here because the Russians are claiming that nobody's using their gas and that's why there's no gas flowing through the pipeline. But it could also be that the Russians are limiting the supply and therefore that's why nothing's moving through the pipeline. But either way, what we're seeing is an increase in the prices in the market. And this is bad news for a lot of economies in Europe. So I reported recently that Turkey produces around about 25% of its electricity from natural gas that it's buying from Russia. And also most households in Turkey use gas for heating and cooking. Germany and Italy are two of the biggest purchasers of Russian gas in the European markets. All of these economies have a direct relationship with the price of gas. So if we continue to see gas prices going up, then that's going to cause a knock-on impact for inflation. And as we've discussed before, one of the key mechanisms for fighting inflation is to increase interest rates. And if you increase interest rates, then that obviously increases the cost of borrowing, and you get this circular impact. So the movement in the gas prices in Europe right now is actually really important because it could have a direct relationship to the economic success of a lot of countries over the next 12 months or so. So it's been announced that President Lasso of Ecuador will be making a trip to China on the 3rd of February to discuss its debt obligations. Ecuador is a developing country and has been running at a net loss over the last decade or so, and so it's had to borrow money from the international markets. And President Lasso's predecessors decided that it was a good idea to take borrowing in from China. Ecuador has oil reserves and is one of the largest producers of oil in Latin America. And it's run up over $5 billion of debt to China in 3 different types of deals. The first type were crude for credit deals, whereby Ecuador was providing oil to China in exchange for being given debt facilities. The second type of deals were investment into infrastructure projects in Ecuador, such as mining and dam building. And the third were straightforward debt arrangements. So President Lasso has decided that he no longer wants to be taking more credit from China, and he agreed a deal with the IMF last year to take on $6.5 billion of new debt. However, the legacy debt with China is due to be repaid in installments over the next 3 years. And so he's now booked in a meeting to go and meet with the authorities to talk about how he's going to restructure that debt, because Ecuador doesn't have enough capital to be able to repay it. So it looks like he's going to have to renegotiate the terms and agree an extension to these facilities. So it will be quite interesting to see how those talks go and what sort of position China takes, whether or not they're happy to just agree to changing the terms of that deal, or whether they want more crude oil or some form of other commercial arrangement from Ecuador in exchange for this extension. So a couple of interesting developments on Tesla over the last few days. Firstly, it's announced a tie-up with Talon Metals for the supply of nickel. Now, nickel is important to electric vehicle manufacturers because it's used in the production of the batteries to extend the range. And nickel is quite an environmentally unfriendly product in terms of the extraction processes. So Tesla has signed a deal with Talon Metals, which is a US-based company located in Minnesota. Talon Metals has an arrangement with Rio Tinto for the supply of its raw materials, and the production of the nickel is not actually expected to commence until 2026. So this is quite a long-term agreement that Tesla have put in place. But it's a big step forward because the processes that Talon will be using will be more environmentally friendly than the existing systems. From the investment perspective, Goldman Sachs have now increased their target price for Tesla to $1,200 per share. And they've said that they expect the Tesla market cap to go above $2 trillion during 2022. The current price is around about $1,000, and the market cap as it sits today is just over $1 trillion. So doubling in the market cap is actually a really bullish statement from Goldman Sachs. So let's see how that ends up over the course of the next 12 months. Now, I've had some production data from Rivian over the last couple of days, and as expected, the full year production for 2021 has come in lower than expectations. So it's been reported that the company actually produced 1,015 vehicles and managed to deliver 920 of those. If you've been following the channel, you'll know I recently posted a video on Rivian talking about the share price and the market cap, and I was struggling really to be able to join the dots because the value of the company just didn't reflect what the business is actually doing right now. This company at the time of that video was valued at a higher market cap than Ford and General Motors, even though at that point it had only delivered around about 350 vehicles to its customers. Now, Rivian has been a phenomenon in terms of its valuation. It listed at the beginning of November 2021 in New York, and its share price rose from an initial price of $78 to a high of over $170. And the market cap initially was over $100 billion. Now, the share price has taken a battering over the last month or so, and we've seen a fall of over 30%. GM and Ford have both launched electric pickup competitors, and Rivian's share price is now hovering at around about its list price. I remain negative on the Rivian story, and I think the share price still looks a bit high to me. I think there's room for this stock to come off even further over the next few months. And finally today, I wanted to let you know that we've got a new richest man in Asia, and it's probably somebody you've never heard of, and it might even be a company that you're not familiar with. CZ Zhao is the founder and chief executive of Binance, which is the world's largest cryptocurrency exchange. And the Bloomberg Billionaires Index estimates that his personal wealth is now $96 billion, making him the richest man in Asia. Zhao is a 44-year-old businessman who was born in China but moved to Canada when he was a child. He founded the company in 2005 in Shanghai, and it's grown to be the largest cryptocurrency exchange globally. And a majority of his wealth is derived from his shareholding in Binance. So at $96 billion, his wealth puts him on a par with Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, and Larry Page, the founder of Google. But interestingly, he's a very down-to-earth individual, and he's actually stated that he doesn't really make any personal investments. So he's not a big crypto coin user himself. And as a heartwarming end to this particular video, he recently said that he intends to give away 99% of his wealth. He's not a materialistic guy. He says he's happy as long as he's got food on the table and a comfortable existence. He doesn't need enormous wealth. So he intends to give away the majority of it. So a non-power hungry, benevolent billionaire who intends to give away all of his wealth is quite a nice way to wrap up today. Hopefully you've enjoyed what I've said. If you did, then please give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already.